Hello, everybody. I just got to do my do not disturb here on my screen to make sure that nobody's going to bug us here. Welcome to TGIK. For those not in the know, I am Joe Beda. I'm your host for today. So TGIK is a weekly-ish live stream that we do focused on Kubernetes and the larger ecosystem. And by we, I mean a bunch of folks and friends of VMware and VMware Tanzu. I'm principal engineer at VMware, working on all things Kubernetes across what we're doing. And today, our plan is that we're going to be looking at what I think is going to be a series of TGIKs. We're going to be digging into sandbox projects. And so the sandbox project today that we're going to be looking at is this thing called Backstage. But first, I want to start out by saying hello to everybody and checking to make sure that you can all hear me fine. Things, 1 o'clock snuck up on me today, and I didn't get a chance to do any sort of AV check. So let me know if things are coming through fine. And I want to also say hello to all the folks who are dialing in from all over the world. It's great to see you all. It's like friends that I haven't talked to in for a while, and so it's just great. So starting at the top here, Lamati, good to see you. You're always first to say hi. Rory from Scotland, good to see you again too. David, Suresh from Hamburg, Ivan, Martin from the Netherlands, Waleed, good to see you. You're always joining us too. Savi, I hope I'm saying your name right, from Istanbul. Suresh. The countdown that you all are mentioning is part of I'm trying out. We've been using StreamYard as a platform for doing this stuff. It's just a lot easier for folks to get up and running with versus OBS, which, learning how to configure OBS is a full-time job, to be honest. There's some things I like better about OBS, but StreamYard is so much easier to get going with. So Juka, good to see you from Helsinki. Khalid, Chams from Tunisia. Holy moly. So a lot of folks saying hi. Phoenix, Tehran, Scottsdale, North Carolina, Belgium, Orlando. Good to see you all. All right. Well, why don't we just go ahead and start jumping into things? So the first thing is that I'm going to be going through, we're going to have a shared notes document, and you can always get to that at tgik.io/notes. This is where both will pull together some sort of interesting things that I pulled out. I didn't have a ton of time to do it this time around, that we can go over, news of the week, but also as we go through the rest of the looking at Backstage, we can use this as a place to actually, keep track of interesting links and things that we find as we go. So, oh, wow. Amon Jordan, good to see you. Massachusetts, all over. All right, let me go ahead and start broadcasting here. Now, I can do two formats. I can do this where it shows, this one here where it shows me in the thing, but I think I'm not going to show my face here, and we'll just show the screen. The URL for this it's on the screen, but tgik.io/notes. So there we'll go. We'll put that up there, and I can show that. That's the link that you want to go to if you want to see. Oh yes, Kind, new version of Kind. Good for whoever is putting that in there. Thank you very much. That's something that should definitely be there. So very cool. All right, so here's what I got going on. Let's switch to view mode here. So there's a bunch of keps that I think are worth calling out here. And this is a great way to keep an eye on sort of where the community is going, where Kubernetes is going. And we start to see, some really interesting, themes start to emerge here. And it's really honestly about, none of these things are, I think groundbreaking features. It's about maturing the stuff that we have and just making it more solid. So I'll go through these real quick here. And let me close some of these other links that we have. There we go. So let's go through these. And we have an internal sort of like pulse of what's happening in Kubernetes. And thank you to Nikita, who pulled some of this stuff together for us, because I think that definitely helps us keep an eye on things. and she's been driving a lot of these things. So this is the type of stuff that I think folks are focused on, is that, publishing versioning information and open API, is is super interesting. Versions and APIs and upgrades, these are things that aren't exciting, but they're absolutely critical to make this stuff work long term, and to really create a situation where, as we come out with new versions of Kubernetes, people can upgrade with confidence, and we can actually build systems that work better and better in the face of these types of things that are going on. And being able to take this type of versioning down to the field level is really interesting also. I think, there's, with systems like Kubernetes, and I think we've seen this, talking to a lot of Pivotal colleagues in the experience over the long term with things like Cloud Foundry, you're always kind of stuck in this thing of like, hey, if I upgrade, that may destabilize things, but if I don't upgrade, then I get left behind, and my options in terms of support and being able to use the new features get less and less over time. And so there's a real need, I think, to make sure that we create, the ability for people to be able to upgrade with confidence. And that's just really critical for the longevity of Kubernetes over the long term. So that's really, really important. Oh, Nova's here. With my wife Rachel's down there helping Nova out, and Patrick and Bjorn, her little pupper. So good to see you. Yeah. So this is something that I think is really critical, and I think so that's really cool. And Nikita's been working a lot on that. So thank you, Nikita, around that. Let's see. Next thing. Sub-resource support. This again is maturing the Kubernetes API server. I think, the idea of a sub-resource, and I think, I don't know how familiar folks are with sub-resources, but the idea of a sub-resource is that, we have these resources in Kubernetes, things like a pod or a replica set or a deployment. And generally we break those things down into spec and status. And the idea here is that we want over time to be able to create more aspects of that resource that you can actually deal with independently. And so the first sub resource of any interest, the first interesting one was, between besides spec and status, was scale. And so this is the thing that the autoscaler then works against. And so it starts creating much more focused sort of APIs or methods for people to be able to impact resources with sub-resources. And being able to use these things with CRDs over time. And I think that's something that, if it's not already there, is definitely coming. Yeah, here's like for CRDs. But the other interesting thing that you get with sub-resources is the ability to provide specialized permission for those sub-resources. And so now what you can do is, you can, using RBAC in Kubernetes, you can start giving more focused access to certain resources over other resources. And I think that's a really powerful thing that makes RBAC that much more useful for these types of situations. And so being able to integrate that and make them first-class citizens within kube control is really interesting too. So it's great to see this kept coming together. Let's see. Kubelet credential providers. I hadn't had a chance to look at this one. This is really cool. I didn't know that this was happening. So this is really neat. So this is the idea. So right now, the kubelet has to talk to registries to be able to download images. And the way that you authenticate to these things has always been a little bit hacky. You end up with a secret of a certain name that ends up being used, or you can plumb it in directly at the kubelet configuration level. And then there's some registries that use more dynamic auth mechanisms, where you don't have these long-term credentials, but instead you have a process to be able to grab those things and then be able to renew those credentials over time. And so this is essentially a plugin mechanism so that you can actually start dealing with things like the EC2, the AWS registry is the best example, I think, where you can actually start doing more dynamic auth against these things. One of the things, and I haven't had a chance to look at it, but I think would be really exciting, is if we could start using Spiffy and Spire to be able to do this stuff too. That would be really cool. And that's something that I'd love to look at. No, not mentioned in there, but I would expect that this mechanism could play double duty and work there too. Something that I probably want to check out. later and dig into. I'm going to take a note of that and start following up with that. Write down in my notebook, kubelet. Yeah, I'm still old school. I like using note. Oh, you can't even see me, right? But it's me being old school. Is I use like a notebook and like a pencil. I don't know. I have an iPad and I use it for some notes, but sometimes there's just nothing like having a notebook on your desk when you want to jot something down. All right, let's keep moving. And then the last one is kubelet CRI support. This is something that's been going on for a while. This is a general idea of really, this push to take everything in Kubernetes that's marked as beta and get it to GA, and just make sure the fact that, like, hey, we're being honest about the stuff that's in production, that we're serious about it being in production, and that we've actually gone through and dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. The particular update here that I think is interesting that came through, if I can go ahead and find it, is this idea of pinned images. And there's a fascinating history here that I think, is worth looking at, is that when we first did Kubernetes, it was based on top of Docker. And anybody who's run Docker on their desktop for any amount of time knows that, like, Cruft actually collects, and you can actually end up filling up your disk with old Docker images and such. And, over time, Docker itself added a thing that says, do some cleanup, delete all the stuff. But early on in Kubernetes, we recognized that, hey, any images that are sitting on the kubelet, on the node, those images are essentially just a cache, right? We can't let that grow indiscriminately over time. Otherwise, you end up filling up the disk. And anybody who's run, machines in production knows that, filling up a disk is a recipe for disaster, and things generally don't work well after that. And so early on, we added some capabilities in the kubelet to be able to garbage collect images that were running on the disk. And it's worked pretty well over time. But, I'm sure there's some edge cases, and this is fascinating. So now you can go through and actually pin some of these things and say, hey, don't clean up these images. We really need to make sure that these things stay around. And so that's actually really cool to see some of that stuff starting to come into play. And that's the type of sort of refinement of production features and reliability type features that you only sort of discover over time with a lot of experience here. All right, let's keep going through this stuff. And then finally, I just wanted to point folks, the release train keeps moving. Now we've moved to, and I think we covered this in a previous TGIK, we've moved to release cadence of 3 per year instead of 4 per year. I think that's probably better for everybody. It gives folks a little bit more breathing room, and it gives, in terms of those actually driving releases, and it also gives consumers a little bit more room, because our support a window is based on the number of versions, not based on time. And so, in terms of calendar time, it essentially, accelerates or extends the support window. And so just if you go to kubernetes.dev resources release, this is the place to go to find out what's happening with the release, what the schedule looks like, who's driving it, how it's all coming together. Just a great resource if you're actually wondering where things are at with a particular release and actually want to keep up with it. So let's see. Eric saying, not sure if we covered last week, but there's a kept 2413 enabled. Oh yeah, I did see this on Twitter. I don't know if we've covered it. Eric, if you want to put that in the notes, that would be great. This is really exciting also. I think, there are all these things, using things like the seccomp profiles that make Kubernetes more secure, but getting to the point where we can turn those things on by default and being respectful of not breaking people is always a struggle. There's always a leap of faith here in terms of, turning on these things, introducing these new, and you want to make things more secure, but you also don't want to break folks. And so it's always something to celebrate when we can actually make these changes, lock things down, and take that leap to be able to make this stuff accessible for everybody. And so that's really good to see there also. So thanks for putting that one on there. And let's see. And here's the link to it. Super exciting. Yeah. So yeah, something to look at here. And I love how, the KEP process, I think this is, again, part of the maturity of part of the maturity of Kubernetes itself is that we're really moving to a footing where, again, boring stuff, but important stuff. And the KEP process itself means that we get a clear signal of what's coming down the pike in terms of new features, new efforts, and a great way for people to be able to really discover, what's happening. And so one thing to be able to point to saying, here's the plan. For those inside the project, KEPs are a pain in the ass. I mean, just to be honest, it feels like a lot of process, but in terms of being able to communicate across both the contributor and the user community, they're absolutely critical. And so it's great to be able to see this stuff come together. All right. Looking around, a couple of other things that I wanted to call attention to here. So we have, I just want to be like, look at all the sandbox projects. Holy moly. Kelsey posted something on Twitter about this a little while ago. And, the CNCF Technical Oversight Committee, and these are the folks that decide which projects to accept into the CNCF and which projects to actually move to incubation and graduation. Over time, I think, at one point when I was on the TOC, there was this question of like, how much editorial control should we take over admitting new projects into the CNCF? And I think over time, we've decided to, if things look like they're well governed, if things look like they're on track and really topical, hey, the sandbox is a great place for them to be. And so we've worked to make sure that, it's more and more accessible over time for folks to join the CNCF and the sandbox projects. And I think, we're definitely starting to see this come together with all of the various cool projects here. And so, like, I think this episode, I want to be sort of the start of a series where we're going to be doing more and more of looking at the sandbox projects. Let's see, other stuff that's going on. Here's a new thing that showed up on Hacker News. I saw vCluster. This is really interesting. And there's been a lot of efforts to be able to do this. And so this is something I'd like to play with at some point. It looks really interesting. It essentially runs sub API servers and then recreates new pods in the host cluster, and then I want to understand sort of what the networking and security model there is, but it looks really interesting here. So that's something to be aware of. Let's see, this looked really cool, and I want to explore this. I just need more hours in the day. This is a deeper dive into ephemeral containers, which are a way to essentially create a new container inside of a pod, mostly for the purposes of being able to debug things. And it's something that I haven't had a chance to play with yet, but I'm really excited to, at some point, be able to really dig into and understand how it all works. So that looks really cool. So Martin, thanks for posting that. Yeah, Chris says, the SecCom stuff is interesting, in quotes. I'm glad folks are starting to look at kernel level controls, albeit I don't know if Kubernetes has any business mutating the kernel. Well, the Kubernetes and the kernel are always, tied at the hip. I'm not sure that there's there's always a dance there, I think, in terms of making it easier to actually orchestrate this stuff versus expecting people to have other systems to be able to drive this. So, yeah. So, good to see that coming. Oh, look at that. Another KEP that somebody put on there around pod security emission control, essentially looking beyond PSP. I'm going to keep moving, though. I just want to make sure that we're going. So kind V11 is great to see with the new node. I think I just updated, and that's what I'm using now. So I think version. Yep. So we're going to be testing that out and using that today. Kind is really great, and sort of, congrats to the Kind team on getting a new release out there. My other understanding is that this is now working with the ARM-based Macs, which is really cool. At some point, I'm going to have an ARM Mac and be able to play with this stuff, and so it's great to see that support coming together. And then, here's a conference that I'd seen some talk on. This is WTF is SRE. Is this put on by the who's putting this stuff on? So this looks interesting also. So probably lots of great talks there. I hadn't had a chance to check it out, but very cool. All right. So let's go ahead and get started and start. Oh yeah, so container solutions, yeah, because they also do the software circus conference also, and so that looks really cool there. Yeah, the and software circus is the one where I did the talk wearing the pickle Rick costume. Yeah, exactly. That was a lot of fun. All right, cool. So backstage.io, let's just jump into it here. Um, so I'm still wrapping my head around what Backstage is, and that's honestly one of the reasons why I wanted to do this as a TGIK. I you know, it's described here as a centralized service catalog, but I think one of the things that we're seeing is that it's an extensible dashboard platform also, built to be able to run, with and on Kubernetes. Um, and And service catalog itself, I don't know about you, but at least to me, is actually a really confusing term. And it means a lot of different things to different people. And I think what we find here is that, and there's Corey Quinn uh had a Twitter thread where he started ranting about Backstage specifically, talking about how he thinks it's the wrong solution for a lot of folks. And I think for me, one of the things I'm struggling with here is how much inside of an organization do you want to have something like Backstage, which provides maybe a wrapped experience over some underlying infrastructure or systems. And I think that's oftentimes when people say service catalog, and you can't see the air quotes I'm doing there, but a lot of times when people say service catalog, what they're talking about is something which is essentially an opaque proxy, domain specific, heavyweight, proxy in front of the resources that you need. So oftentimes it's like, thinking about like, instead of a cloud like very flexible API, a much more curated set of services to be able to get to what you need to get to. And that can be really liberating for developers inside of an enterprise to have that curated set of experiences. But I also worry that it can be limiting too, right? In terms of, hey, if what you want to do is acceptable through the service catalog, great. If it's not, then what do you do then? Where do you go from there? And so one of the things that I'm going to keenly be looking at when we, as we're playing with Backstage here is how much of Backstage tries to wrap and cover the underlying infrastructure versus how much does it really, view itself as can you use it as a transparent way to be able to accelerate access, make the easy pass easy, but doesn't necessarily cut you off or hide you from the underlying infrastructure. And I think another way to say this is that oftentimes people will say that if, as an application developer, someone has to get down to the level of using kube control, then maybe something is going wrong, right? We should be able to do everything using other tools that build on top of Kubernetes. And I think that's a great goal. And also, I think that there's times where you need to break glass and you need to actually be able to get to the raw things that are going on. And I think we see this between, something like a service catalog or a dashboard running on top of Kubernetes. But also, I think we see this with respect to Kubernetes and the underlying nodes. It's great to say, hey, if you're using Kubernetes, you should never have to SSH into a node. That's great until you need to SSH into a node. And so there may still be situations where, our abstractions don't necessarily work for us. Oh, Bogdan's asking why you can't see me. So the why you can't see me is like, let me know if you like, actually, it's this view. This view here where I have the background here, which may be a little distracting. I can change that a bit. But the screen ends up being a little bit smaller, or I can do the full screen. Let me know what you guys like better here. I'll do this one for a little bit. So that's what we're going to be looking at with Backstage here. And so I started, there's a bunch of marketing stuff here talking about what it is, but I always go right to the docs, and there's what is Backstage. And I think this is probably more likely. It's like an open platform for building developer portals. So you guys like this view better? Okay, cool. Rory's saying we don't need to SSH into nodes anymore. We have kube control debug node. Exactly. All right, cool. And so, there's a service catalog thing, and I think that's worth, like, I want to understand what exactly they mean it. There's this other thing, which is software templates. This is, there's this thing in the Spring world, and I think, if you look at Spring Initializer, this is, I think, in the Spring world is a great way to get started. You're like, hey, start me an app, Maven, Java 2.5, you name it, and then, you can start adding dependencies of, like, I don't even know, like, I'm a Spring idiot, and then, like, generate it, and it gives you essentially an application starter kit, right? Similar, we have things like, Ruby, being able to bootstrap stuff. We're going to see with Backstage itself, it uses NPX to be able to bootstrap your Backstage app. And so I think that this sort of software template pattern, we're starting to see this show up in a whole bunch of different places. Carlos is asking, is there a Go equivalent for Spring? I don't think there is. And so, but I think, we're starting to see, like, hey, maybe you could build a Go Spring starter, Spring initializer using something like Backstage. This is something that we're looking at through the lens of Tanzu too. Go people like to suffer. Well, I would say that Go is minimalist. That's probably the way I would say it. But these are all built as sort of, plugins on this core sort of developer portal platform, which I think is really interesting. So that's where we're going to start with. There's an architecture overview here where essentially you have a user talking to a UI in the browser, and there's a whole bunch of integrating using React browser UI into the main UI. So one way to extend Backstage is to essentially extend the React app that's all running client side. And then those things can actually then come through to a set of backends that can be running, essentially in the cluster. And so ultimately, Backstage is a hosted console, but with an extension model that cuts across both what's running on the backend and actually what's running in the React app that's happening, that's running in your browser. Because it's a hosted, and I think this is one of the things that we're going to see early on as we go through it. Anytime you're running a hosted console, it's great. And also it sucks from the point of view of managing auth. And that's one of the things that gets really complicated here, is that it's super easy to get yourself in troubles with confused deputy issues with respect to auth, with things like that. And so that's something else that I'm going to be paying close attention to as we go through this stuff. And so what you find is that there's some core components here, and then the plugins actually get a chance to actually run their stuff in context with everything else. And so this here ends up being the service catalog plugin. And then there's different plugins that actually go ahead and run. And there's a Circle CI one. There's a Lighthouse one. I haven't used Lighthouse, so that looks interesting. And then so there's documentation on installing plugins, essentially. Fundamentally, it starts with the UI. A plugin is a UI thing, and then from there you can actually plug in the back end stuff if it needs it. And there's like plugins that are purely client side, standalone plugins is what they call them, and then there's service backed plugins where either the service is running a instance of the service for you, or perhaps the service is actually you have some sort of lightweight proxy that ends up taking you and doing the right authy stuff to be able to talk to some third-party hosted service. In this example, it'd be something like Circle CI. And you need that that proxy there, because otherwise you get into all sorts of trouble around cores, cross-origin resource sharing stuff. So that's the general architecture of how this stuff comes together. Now let's go ahead and let's get going. And so we're going to do getting started. And so we're going to be viewing this as a user, not as a contributor. And so ultimately, and this is where I start looking dumb, because I don't know how this stuff works. I fought with my computer to get Node up and running before this episode to make sure that at least I could run the singular command here. But ultimately, what we're going to do is we're going to create a Node app. And that Node app is going to be the thing that we're going to be running. And what we could do is take that Node app and run it locally to be able to play with it, or package it up and then go ahead and run that on a cluster. We'll see how far we get there in terms of being able to do that. But this is like as far as I've gotten is essentially making sure that this line works. And so then we're going to be playing with it after that. So Shane says, like, anytime I see NPM or NPX, I just run just me. I feel the same way, to be honest. There is, as much as I think folks are intimidated by the Kubernetes world, I feel intimidated when I start dealing with the Node, JavaScript, NPM world. This stuff changes too fast. I've never used NPX before. Yeah, so that Carlos says we're going to get into this, Backstage only works with Node v14. And so if you just go through and say, hey, I want to install Node on Homebrew, you get v16 and things don't work. And so now you have to figure out how to deal with an older version of Node. Part of me is like, stick it in a container, but then, a lot of the tutorials start breaking. Understanding the relationship between the Yarn version that you're using and Yarn versus NPM. And you can use NPM to install Yarn and Yarn to install NPM, which is very confusing to me. Yeah, and so there's a whole bunch of stuff going on here. But what I ended up doing, and I put the notes here, is there's a guide that I ended up following, and it says the best way to install Node.js with Yarn. This is as of April 6, 2020. So I'm sure this is completely out of date, but it seemed to mostly work for me. And this got me to the point where I was using MVM to be able to install 14. So I got that up and running. And so we're going to just go through and follow that guide and get Node. So I can do Node version here, and I'm running 14.17. I can do NPM version, which I think is the latest. And I have Yarn version here too. And I think I ended up using Homebrew to install Yarn and then NVM to install Node. So yeah, it's confusing. And so here's the wizard to create an app. And so the first thing that we're going to do is call create app here. And the first time you run this, it's going to download the world. All that stuff is already cached. And so this happened. Does brew install NVM work? Because I ended up doing the curl pipe to bash to install NVM for me. So I don't know if brew install NVM works. But we're going to enter the name of the app. So we're just going to call this TGIK. And Backstage assumes that it has a database. And it's tested with SQLite or Postgres. Just to keep things simple, we'll start with SQLite here. I think when running this with Kubernetes, when you start running this, all of a sudden now you're in the world with having persistent disks for the SQLite instance. You have to worry about backing those things up and the whole deal. And so, if you can have, maybe use Postgres and defer to some service, whether it be a Postgres operator or what have you, that might actually be a better solution for production workloads. But for getting started, I think SQLite probably seems right to us. And so what this is doing is it's creating a whole bunch of files in a specific structure. It's templating them. I don't know what the HBS extension is. And then it's essentially calling yarn install, which is then downloading all the dependencies here for this particular application. And I am downloading, let's see, I am downloading at, it's mostly a bunch of stuff to disk, it looks like. This is my, we're running a lot of stuff going on right now. Okay, give that a second here as it runs. Yeah, this is my experience with anything in the Node world is that there's a spinny thing there, and if it fails, I have no idea what's going on. I just start Googling stuff until I bang my head against the wall and get it working. And then TSC, I believe that's the TypeScript compiler. And for those who are not part of the JavaScript world, TypeScript is essentially a dialect of JavaScript that has a lot of type annotations on it, mostly driven by Microsoft, but pretty widely adopted in this world now. All right, so the first thing here is that we're going to see it wants us to go through and points us to monorepo app setup with authentication, which is, I think, the next step here in terms of being able to get this stuff going. And then we'll look at this. It created a directory based on the app name that I gave it called TGIK. So we'll go there, and then we'll start VS Code here and start looking around, poking around what's going on. And ooh, this is view. I don't want it that big. That's a little bit too big. How do I zoom? No. View. Appearance. Zen mode. No. Full screen centered layout. Reset zoom. There we go. All right. Let me know if this is readable for y'all. All right. So what do we got? So we got, this is the other thing that confuses me about the node world is that, like, I'm pretty sure I know what package.json is at this point. This is, essentially like the main thing. And this has like dependencies plus a bunch of essentially like aliases for running various commands. And there's it's all, this stuff here. So if you want to upload to a package manager, that type of thing. So yeah, what is Lerna? I have no idea what this is. There's some YAML files here. These look to be Backstage specific. I don't know what appconfig.yaml. This is probably something for Backstage. And then there's a production. Okay, so there's a config and production there. Yeah, so you end up with a whole bunch of random files here. Good luck. It's like, take this, you'll need it. tsconfig, this is for the TS compiler, and then this is the package lock for which versions were. Okay. Yeah, what is the learn A thing? I don't even know. A monorepo tool. Okay, I'm gonna, let's oh, look, we got a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 heads. 7 heads on this. I don't know. Is that fate? Splitting up large code, but this is a mono. Okay, this looks interesting. I want to look at this at some point. See, you learn stuff all the time. Okay, so we have stuff going on here. We have node modules. There's quite a bit of stuff going on there. Let's yeah, dh.f. What is this size? What is this size? Not df. I always, well, to actually get the summary of the disk size. But yeah, there's a lot of modules installed there. This is the node world, of course. And then we got packages here. I believe this ends up being the app itself here that actually gets pulled together, where we have app and backend and, Okay, so let's start digging in here. So the first thing here is that it's create the monorepo application. We did that. We went through and we created the ID. We chose SQLite. And then we start the backend locally. Let's give this a try. And so this is essentially saying yarn current working directory backend start. So what is that going to be doing? So that's going to be putting us here. And we have a package.json within our package.json. And this is going to be calling Backstage CLI. All right, let her rip. Let's see what happens. All right, so this is doing some stuff. It's looking for packages app disk static. That's du is the command I was looking for. Yeah. Like we can go and cd TGIK 155. We can do yeah. So holy moly. 823 megabytes of node dependencies that got pulled down for this thing. Holy moly. Okay. Yeah, we've definitely have downloaded the internet there. All right. So this thing looks like it, I don't know, something. We got one warning here, but it looks like mostly things are working here. So that got up and running. Okay, open a new terminal window and from the root of your project, do yarn start. Okay, so let's go. I have a new terminal window here. I do yarn start. Oh, let's see what happens. We got a spinny here, and it's a scaffold. Oh, look at that. We got a thing. We got a thing. All right. I don't know if this is real or fake data here with this thing. Service catalog. But we have a thing. So we see Backstage. There's search. Hello. Hello world. That pulls together this. Fascinating. We have APIs. Okay, so we have home, which is the catalog. APIs, which are these the things that you're talking to. Documentation. And then create, we have templates that you can create. So we can create a new React app from within our React app. Yo, dog. All right, here's initializer for Go. So create a Golang repo. All right, so let's start exploring all of this and see what's going on here. And then Tech Radar, this is their example of like completely static stuff going on here. And then settings, we have a profile theme. Of course, we get dark theme. You know, it's not a Web 2.0 app unless it has dark theme. And you can set up authentication providers and feature flags and stuff. Okay. So it's a great experience. It gives you that sort of like, hey, I get a sense of what the thing is, even if I get the sense that a lot of this stuff is probably mocked up and fake, but it definitely gives you an idea of what it is you're building. So Bogdan's saying that this is more like an average size project. And people bitch about the size of Kubernetes binaries, right? It's like 800 some megabytes of dependency here. Is kind of crazy. Okay, let's keep going here. So we got that going. And so what we have here is we have localhost 3000 is where we're actually hosting this, but the backend is running on 7000. And so I don't know, like one of the things I want to see here is if I go through and I do developer tools here, and I look at like, so this thing, where's my network? I want to see like what networking calls we're making as we do this. Okay, network. And let me do a reload here. Oh. So this thing is pulling all this stuff down. But it's now, okay. So as it's making API calls, it's going to 7000 to the backend. And so what we're doing here is we're running essentially two web servers. One of these things is to essentially just, serve up the UI, right? The UI bundle. The other thing is, the React thing. And oftentimes when you're doing React development, it'll do sort of like, in place sort of like recompilation and reserving and all that. And then there's a backend at running at 7000, which is essentially the thing that you would be running in your cluster that you're talking to here. And they probably have the right crap set up so that you're not getting the cross origin stuff. So Carlos is saying that he likes the proxy solution to do GraphQL calls. I don't know. I haven't seen that yet. So they're essentially sending GraphQL through this stuff and then forwarding it on to other things, I guess. I don't know. So cool. And Sevi's saying, like, when tech radars are promoted, we used to have one for our company 2 years ago, forked from TW, of course. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I've ever used tech radar stuff, so I don't know. Interesting. Okay, well, let's get started. Okay, so that's feels like we have a thing here, and we're running this stuff up and running. The last time I really dipped my toes into the Node world was when I did the example server for Kubernetes up and running Quard. And I ended up doing a lot of this stuff and learning a little bit of React, and I'm sure it's really kind of out of date now. So Khalid's asking, so this is like a cloud native IDE. I don't think so. So the idea of a cloud native IDE is it's really focused on, like, an IDE says it's for developers to be able to do development and do stuff. This is more like, we talk about integrated development environments. I see things like this, and I don't think we've seen this fully formed yet. But I want to think about, like, what would an integrated operations environment look like? Because we have these two sides of the coin, right? We have operations and we have development. I'm really thinking about, like, how do we actually provide that one-stop shop, that integration point that brings everything together for an operations function, similar to what we have with IDEs. So yeah. So there's one. How do we add existing apps projects? I don't know. We're going to figure that out. Dev dashboards for devs, but there's an operational aspect of this also. I think because they're talking about service catalog, I'm still learning. And then EFFX, I'm not familiar with that, so I don't know. Okay, so let's keep digging into this. Since there's no auth currently configured, you are automatically entered as a guest. Let's fix that now and add auth. So I went through, and so they provide. So this is where a lot of these things get complicated, because the minute you need to integrate with auth, especially within certain enterprise environments, it gets really, really complicated. This is filing tickets, justifying your existence, waiting weeks to be able to get to the point where you can actually do this type of integration inside of a corporate environment. So this is one of the reasons why, when we did Octant, which definitely does have some in common with Backstage, we viewed Octant as a client-side thing to get around that auth problem, to make sure that the plugins are your plugins, and you are using your authentication when you're talking to the backends, to the clusters that you're working with. And so I think that's a really interesting thing there. So what I went through is I did go through, and if you look at here with GitHub, we're going to use GitHub. I went through and followed these instructions. And so I have environment variables with a client ID and secret going on already. And I'm really hoping I'm not going to flash any secrets on the screen, but, we'll see how things go. So we're going to open the appconfig.yaml and then change the auth provider here like this for GitHub. And so appconfig.yaml, let's find, we'll do some stuff, TGIK Backstage app, because this is all fun. We're using SQLite in memory. Okay, interesting. I don't know what the memory means. I don't know enough about SQLite to say there. And then integrations, we have GitHub token. I don't know what that does yet, because there's integrations and there's auth. And so we're just doing the auth stuff. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And that should work. And then scaffolder and catalog. Okay, we're going to have to dig into this stuff. Allow component. Okay, and this is pulling stuff from some example YAML files that are actually running as part of this stuff here in the Backstage repo. All right, so we're going to have to dig into that. So this is where the sort of the example mock-up data that we're talking about is coming from. And we're going to go from there. And then, yeah, okay, a lot to dig into here. Yeah, we're all YAML engineers now. That's definitely true. Eric, thanks for sticking with us here. Okay. So the question here from Flesh is, can you explain why we are building an app for Backstage? Can we just run a binary? I think it's because the way that their plugins work is that you do a plugin at the source level, and then you're reusing all of the the node build stuff to be able to recompile that into, essentially, think about it as a static binary for the browser. And so, the idea here is that we need to be able to build the app, because that's where we configure and bring all our plugins together. And this is not uncommon in the node world, to be able to think about extensibility at kind of this sort of, it's not a framework, but it's not really a library, this sort of frameworky source code. And that's really, I think, where Backstage fits. I'm not super comfortable with it. It's not something I have a lot of experience with, so I'm mumbling through here. Okay, so we went ahead and did that. I got the secrets all up and running. I have those things in my environment. I'm not going to dump them for you to see. And then we have to go through and change the root packages app source app.tsx to use the correct authentication provider. And so this is the GitHub one. And so this is packages app source app.tsx. All right. And then do we just add this? Modify the imported reference based on. Okay, so I guess we just go ahead and. Oh, I gotta. What is it saying? Oh, it's saying it's unused. So we imported it. In the same file, modify create app. Yeah, I think what's fascinating to me, just to be honest, is that for folks who are like part of React, everything we're doing here is second nature. And it's like, well, yeah, of course you want to do that. For folks who are not front end engineers, this is incredibly intimidating, to be honest. Like every time I do this, I feel stupid. I think it's good. It builds empathy for, so create app, APIs. I don't understand what I'm supposed to do here, because it says modify this with components, but then we have bind routes here. So this is where I start feeling stupid, to be honest. Okay, so what we're passing into create app is essentially an object. And this object has so APIs here. Wow, I am really feeling lost here. So create new back. So we can go to the definition here, and this is getting app options. Go to definition, and what we have is, oh, okay. So, oh man, so this stuff is, so, all right, let's decode this stuff a little bit, because I think I understand what's going on here. And folks who are JavaScript experts can help me out here. So when you actually, so essentially what we're doing is we're passing an object here that is a set of key value pairs. And when you're doing that, if the name of the variable that you're passing in is the same as the key, then this is just syntactic sugar for doing APIs, right? So that's the same thing going on there. And so we can see that same thing with bind routes, right? So this is the same as doing bind routes. But maybe, why is it mad at me now? Cannot find name bind routes. Maybe this is something else. I don't know. This is doing some sort of like, this is where like the syntax is confusing me. I have no idea what's going on here. Okay, but in any case, what I think we can do here is we want to actually do plugins and components here, which are things that we haven't seen yet. So we have same as bind. Function that is used to register associations between. Okay. Yeah. So that's the documentation there. Okay. So the other thing that's going on here, and this is stuff that's confusing, is that the TSX extension here is as part of React, they actually defined a dialect of JavaScript called JSX that actually has inline HTML like syntax here. And what that actually does is that's syntactic sugar for actually creating a bunch of objects by essentially having the sort of the HTML or the markup in line. And so there's a sort of another compiler before you run the compiler that actually translates these things into essentially calls to create JavaScript objects. So this is where we're at there. We have plugins where it says don't know object value plugins. Maybe that's routes here. So it looks like even their examples are out of date here. So this is really confusing me. For more information, you can clone this thing. Line 44, the bind. Oh, I see. So that's like if you did bind like that. Okay. And here we're going through, and if we look at packages, app, source, app.tsx, what do we have here? They have the auth providers. We're doing create app plugins. Where are the plugins coming in? Import startup plugins. What? We have this line here. So confused. We have a whole bunch of plugins, but apparently instead of using the plugins, we're just using the okay, we're going to do this. I'm going to take that line out. We're going to assume we're using the components. I'm going to save this and we're going to hope for the best. And now I should be able to go here and look at that. So this is the live reload stuff that you get. So now it's asking me to sign in. Oh, and we got an error. No auth provider. Do I need to restart? Oh, I may need to restart the back end one. So let's go through and do that. There we go. And now I can go through and this is the app that I created for GitHub earlier. I can go ahead and authorized, and boom, now we're here and we're authorized and we got auth running. Now, and you can see it pulls a bunch of my stuff from GitHub and all that. So we got that up and going. So Champs, I think this is one of those things. I mean, there's a really big lesson here for me, at least in terms of the stuff that feels easy to us in Kubernetes is incredibly intimidating to folks that, maybe live in this world. Similarly, this world feels incredibly intimidating and confusing to folks. I was talking to somebody earlier today who's very early in his career, actually in a CS program, trying to figure out where to get started in the industry. And a big part of that conversation is that so much of the tech industry these days is so specialized. So much of it really does come down to these sort of hey, if you're doing machine learning, you don't know what's going on with web development versus back-end cloud system. And so, yeah, so having to know React to be able to actually control a plugin here, if you know React, it's easy. If you don't, man, you're going down a complexity curve that you have to deal with. So I view this as an empathy building exercise for me. Okay, so we got we got this up and running. One of the things that I think is fascinating to me here is that I have one level of authentication here to Backstage. Now, as I configure things in Backstage to maybe go ahead and start actuating something in a Kubernetes cluster behind the scenes, how do I know that the identity I'm using here is the identity that's using there? And it's very easy. This is the root of a ton of security issues where I actually use one identity to be able to talk to something like Backstage. And then Backstage then tries to use that identity or uses another identity when talking to the system that it's talking to, which would be Kubernetes. And so we may have a situation where Backstage has a level of maybe a service account that has wide privileges that it uses to be able to actually talk to Kubernetes. But it's very easy for me to actually trick Backstage in terms of giving me escalated privileges that I wouldn't otherwise have on that cluster. And so this ends up, the class of security issues that we're talking about here is called the confused deputy. And this is the confused deputy problem. And there you go. Barney Fife is the idea, where you can sort of trick Backstage in terms of elevating privileges that you wouldn't see otherwise. And so that ends up being, something that I'm keenly looking at here as we go through this. And so it's great that I'm Auth to Backstage, but that doesn't mean all our Auth problems are over. There's the question of like, how does Backstage then Auth to other systems, and how does it translate my Auth to Backstage to Auth to these other systems? And so oftentimes what people will do is they'll be like, well, Backstage will be our Auth system. But now if you do have to give somebody raw access to Kubernetes, it's very easy to have those things get out of sync. And so having a single identity system that's shared across these systems is absolutely critical. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm, looking at this in context with something like Dex or Pinniped, using Pinniped to be able to talk to these things is going to be really interesting over time. Yeah, Carlos, confused deputy. Now you know it, right? This is it's great to have that name, because once you see that pattern, you start spotting in a bunch of places. And we have it within Kubernetes also, right? If you have the ability to, like, if you look at RBAC in Kubernetes, if you have RBAC to be able to create a replica set, you essentially have the ability to create any pod, right? And so if you want to restrict somebody to create replica sets but not pods, don't bother, right? It's like creating a replica set gives you permission to create a pod. And so that's why within Kubernetes we view sort of the tenancy unit as being the namespace, because we do actually make sure that, hey, there are, we try very hard to make sure that there's no confused deputies across namespaces. This is one of the reasons why you can't access a secret across namespace boundaries, is to try and make sure that we don't get into those confused deputies type of problems. Yeah, so Carlos, you're right. The right thing to do here is to create, to settle on an IDP. Make sure that you have the same IDP, identity provider across both, something like Backstage and the underlying Kubernetes clusters. And then as Backstage wants to act into that Kubernetes cluster, they just say, well, user X here means the same thing as user X there. That makes it a lot easier to avoid these Kubernetes, the confused deputy thing. So can I add more Kubernetes to this? We'll get to it. I want to see where it goes. I'm sorry, I'm going through here, and there's definitely lessons. Okay, so now we can go through, add a new thing here. Let's see if we can get to the point where, so this is GitHub icons and stuff like that. I want to get to where we are actually using some plugins that talk to Kubernetes, or we're actually running this thing on Kubernetes, because that's a good point. So this is deployment. So here we can deploy to Kubernetes, which is interesting. Auth and identity going through this. And then configure, oh, not the right thing, configuration, integrations and plugins. Okay, so I want to see that where this thing is actually working with installing your Backstage app, catalog configuration. So I think the catalog stuff, so it reads, okay, so let's dig into this a little bit here. Integration processors. Sorry, I'm exploring this a little bit here. So I think one of the things, oh, here we go, Kubernetes overview. So I think one of the things that can happen here, and this is where I wanted to get to here, is that this can actually then go through and there we go. Yeah, let's do this. Okay, let's go through this. Is what I think this ends up doing is has Backstage talking to Kubernetes as a source of information that gets showed, dynamically into Backstage. So I think this is under the software catalog or separate. I think this is separate. Okay, this is a separate thing here. Okay, so let's dig into this because I think this is a good thing for us to be able to play with here. Okay, so this feature is made up of two plugins, the plugin Kubernetes, so this is probably the front end, and then the back end, which probably is a proxy to the Kubernetes API, and this is where you can actually start getting into some of those confused deputy types of things. So we're going to go through and install the Kubernetes plugins. So we're going to go through and let's create yet another window here, another TGIK 155, TGIK. The app, what is it? CD packages app. And then we're going to do yarn add, download the internet, get a bunch of warnings that I'm going to ignore, unmet peer dependencies. There we go. So that's up and running. There's some common stuff, I think, between these things. All right. And then once the package is installed, we need to import the plugin into the app by adding the Kubernetes tab. In packages, catalog entity page.tsx. So this is the stuff where this seems a little bit source components, catalog entity page. So this then plugs into the, so this is an extension to the catalog stuff, I think. I don't know. And then you can add the tab to any number of pages. The service page is shown as an example here. So service entity page. So you can pull together these things, and we want to add Kubernetes here to this. This is in entity layout.route. So let's see. So now if I go through here, APIs. Did I save this? Did it show up yet? Other? No, not seeing it yet. All right, so let's keep going and we'll see what's happening here. That's it. Now we need to add the Backstage plugin for the front end to work. Okay, so this is check the logs. Yeah, good point. Let's check the logs here. What did I error out on? No such file or directory. So what is this? Node modules, JSON schema, merge all of, failed to compile. Okay, so we failed to compile here for some reason. Let's go through, because we added a new component, just try restarting the darn thing. Did this one work? Home. What? No. Okay, I am not sure what's going on here. Probably, do I need to npm install a module? Perhaps, I'm not sure. So let's go through and We are in, wait, did I restart? Okay. So here, if I do yarn start again here, yarn workspace app start, failed, compiled successfully. Catalog is the thing. Let's see what we have here. So we have after, so we should have, but the problem is I'm not seeing where this is actually being used. Service entity, CI/CD is not showing up there. So I don't know if this is actually being used here. Component page. Okay, so we have service, which is here. Start would not install. Maybe a learn a thing. Yeah, maybe I need, I don't know, man. So this is C packet. Oh, maybe I shouldn't have done this. Maybe it doesn't belong here because we didn't have a lock file here before, did we? Maybe we did. Huh. Or what do I do? Can I do npm start? Yeah. Okay, so it's so here it says it's websites. This is man, this stuff is confusing to me. I got to be honest. Okay, so let's go through and see what's going on here. So we have API page, user page, group page, system page, domain page, entity page. So this is the root. So we have component API group user system domain. If is kind children component page. I feel like did we put it on the wrong thing? Service entity page. That's it. It's easy. That's not easy. Okay. Default entity page, component page. Service entity page. So this is the thing that confuses me, is that service entity page is not, okay, that's referenced from component page. If it's a type of service. Comment says just an example. Where's that? This is an example of how you can implement your company's logic in entity page. You can, for example, enforce that all components of type service should use GitHub Actions. Man, I don't know. Okay, so we have, I feel like this is part of the software catalog stuff, and so maybe we need to start here. Installing your Backstage app, so we did that. Add entries to the catalog. At this point, the catalog backend is installed in your backend page, but you will not have any entities loaded. To get up and running, try out some templates quickly. So we have this where it's essentially, okay, let's back up a little bit here and go. I did do the yarn add. I did that. Back here, when we look at installations, I did run this yarn add here. So that is packages app. I did do that. Oh, maybe it didn't work last time. I thought I did this. I'm 100% sure I did this. Well, shoot. All right, let's give it a try. Oh, yeah, I need to run the thing. So when it says whiting and bundle finish, what it's doing is it's doing just-in-time compilation here. Error, can't resolve Backstage plugin Kubernetes and blah blah blah, failed to compile. So why can't it do that? I added that. And it says it's done. Saved one new dependency. Now I start. Still saying it can't do it. Added in the wrong folder? I don't think so. Let's see. So the docs say packages app, right? I'm in packages app here. And it says there I need to do the yarn add. I followed the instructions here. I did that. And then when we look here, we have installing Kubernetes, plugin Kubernetes, plugin tech docs. You know what I'm going to do just to be safe is I'm going to go back here, add it there. Okay, add it to their workspace root versus the. Yeah, let's do that with the -w flag. Let's see what happens. Or maybe, yeah, maybe I needed to start from the root. I feel like we skipped some steps in the tutorial. We're kind of, oh, compiled successfully. So that seemed to work. All right, do we see anything yet? Has it changed? I'm not sure where this is supposed to show up, to be honest. Because this is still using, or maybe it's because we don't have the back end on yet. Okay, so let's go through and let's keep going here because we need to run the back end. Ambit gate to back end. Now we need the back end to be able to work. Okay, you're right. Yeah, okay, so we're going to do this. I'm going to follow the directions exactly. Create okay. Let's see, where do we want to do this? Okay, so sorry, I'm just create source plugin, touch kubernetes.ts, open. There we go. That's the file that we want. And then we're going to do this stuff. Okay, so this is a router on in the for create router types logger config. Okay. And import the plugin into backend source index.ts. Ooh, there's a lot of stuff here that I want. Whoa. Okay. Backend source index.ts. We need to import this. Which is working, and then async main, here's the main. I assume we just do that. Okay, so I think what this does is it says that anything that comes into the Kubernetes route on this particular server will get forwarded to the Kubernetes plugin. And then this thing then essentially creates the router that's part of this plugin, which I assume then essentially will forward or essentially expose the Kubernetes API back in through Backstage. So now it says run it locally and then configure it. Configuring Kubernetes integration. Enabling the backend to collect objects from Kubernetes cluster, surfacing your Kubernetes objects and catalog entities. Okay, so let's go through and we got some fun stuff going on here. Okay, so where do we, in appconfig.yaml. So now we're going to teach our backend how to actually talk to Kubernetes. And so we don't have a Kubernetes stanza here yet, so let's just throw that in here. Service locator method. This can be assumed that all components run on all the provided clusters. I don't know what that means. Where the retrieve cluster information from? From your app config below, clusters used by the config. Okay, so we have cluster locator methods. So we have type equals config, type equals GKE. So it has some specific GKE integrations there. Okay, so I have, let's see, how do I do this? Config. So we have so here we can do minikube. We're going to do name equals kind because that's what I have. Cube control. Config, what do we got? View. What do I have? I have kind cluster. How many kinds do I have? Apparently I have a lot of kinds. Kind. What's the one that we're using right now? Current is kind. This one here. Okay, so this is the port that we're on. Yeah, I should be using kube context, but I just want to make sure I can copy this stuff. Okay, we're doing the service account thing. Skip TLS verify. I mean, true. Let's not get stuck on that. It can talk to multiple clusters here, but we're only talking to one. And then the account token, do I have to like create that and, okay. So now the question is that like, so this is the thing where I think they haven't necessarily done a good job of letting you know, like, okay, you need now to create a service account and here's the permissions that you want to give that service account. It says like, create and give it a service account. So let's go through and create, I guess, a service account. Well, what service accounts do kube control get? We have the default one, which I believe that gives you like read-only access, or no, I think by default it gives you no access, right? Yeah, I think inside the cluster, it can probably do that without doing that, right? So at some point, we can go ahead and do that. Yeah, this is the thing where it's like we're giving it a service account token, and like, the right thing to do is, I mean, the easy thing to do is create service account Kubernetes. I always forget that. And so okay. So let's go through and kube control create service account. We want to, I haven't, okay, so we're going to call this Backstage. So we'll go ahead and do that. So we now have a service account, but now we have to create a cluster role binding for this. Kube control create cluster role binding. And we're going to do through and let's see what is the kube control? Okay, so we have Backstage is the name of the thing, cluster role equals cluster admin. Okay, so we'll give this thing admin, which is probably a bad idea. This is in the default namespace that this particular service account was in. And yeah, cluster admin one. Yeah, and so now it's saying like, okay, you can just go ahead and like pull out the token this way from the secret, which is like at some point this thing will get rotated and it'll break. So this is probably a bad idea. What? I don't have JQ installed. Okay, so namespace, default, get secret, control N. What do we call this? We call this Backstage, I think, right? Wait, I'm confused. Oh, wow, this is like confusing. Arr. All right, let's construct our command line here. There's some trick that you can use in Bash to say load it up into an editor and then like let me edit the command line and then but like I'm bad at that. So this thing was kube get called it Backstage. Okay, let's double check that. Control X, Control E. Yeah, there you go. That's the one. All right. No, don't say that. Okay. Whoa, what happened here? How did like my was wrong window? Sorry. There we go. Okay. Copy paste this puppy. Boom. Okay, so that's our service account token. And then I can, pipe this to pb copy. And then we can go into appconfig.yaml. And I guess what we can do, we'll just go through and do. Okay. What could go wrong? Let's give it a try. I know I need to do the alias. I like typing it out, and especially when like I used to have a lot of aliases that I used all the time, but like not everybody has those, and I think with TGIK it sometimes confuses folks when I have like my own sort of setup for all this stuff. Okay, where we're at. So we have this thing configured. Well, okay. So what else do we? Okay, so I think we're good. I think we're good there. We probably need to go through and restart. Okay, and that looks like that's working. And it probably okay. So now we may have this stuff working. Okay, so but like we wouldn't know, right? Because it's not going to show stuff up. It doesn't. So the idea here, I think, is that this is like this isn't like a Kubernetes centric browser. This is essentially something that can pull together all of your resources, and one of the sources of truth is Kubernetes. And so now the next step here is we go through, and if we go back one thing, is there was like configure them, surfacing your Kubernetes objects as catalog entities. That's the thing that we want to do. Okay, so what we can do here is, in order for Backstage to detect an entity has Kubernetes components, the following annotation should be added to the entity's catalog info.yaml. Okay, so, and then you label that with, in order for Kubernetes components to show up in the service catalog as part of an entity, Kubernetes components themselves can have the following label. Okay, so let's give this a try. You can write your own custom label selector query that Backstage will use to look up the object similar to selector, review the labels and selectors. And so I don't know where we put this thing here, but this is, I think, a label on this. So let's run some QuarD. We'll go through and okay, we have a pod up and running. And then I can do kube control. This work. Well, I want to add a. Go ahead and do this, and then let's add a label. And maybe this will work. Let's see. I don't know. Like, let's do foo. See if that works. Can we do that? Edited. Okay. That's QuarD. Oh, we have the label on there. Yep. Okay. So now maybe tags. I don't think I know. Create component. I don't know if I know. Is an entity. Okay, so maybe. Okay, I think we skipped some of the stuff in Backstage, so now we're confused here. So let me go through. We're going to back up a little bit here. Software catalog, the configuration. Okay, system model, core entities. Components are individual pieces of software. APIs and resources are physical or virtual infrastructure need to operate a component. Component is a piece of software, so it's a component that we're talking about here. Model, so domain system, resource, a component. So this is pretty domain specific. YAML common to all kinds, the envelope method. Wow, there's a lot going on here. Kind component. So I think the idea is, oh, wow. So there's this whole model and they store these things in YAML and then they can actually pull stuff from Kubernetes, but it's not Kubernetes centric. I don't think that the system of record is Kubernetes here. So here we have, dice roller is extending the model, well-known statuses. I'm really confused here. Okay. Backstage and Backstage service catalog make it easy one team to manage 10 services. Okay, getting started. Software catalog is available to browse a catalog. If you followed the installing of the app, yeah, you should be able to browse the catalog. Okay, so we got that, right? So we're here. We don't see anything in the catalog. Well, we do in the APIs thing, but not in the catalog itself. Adding components to the catalog. Manually register components, create new components through Backstage or integrate with an external source. We can go through and register existing components. And then that actually, you point it to GitHub. And then within that, there's a whole bunch of stuff. So there's sort of a GitOps type of thing here to actually pull this stuff out. It's important to note that any kind of software can be registered in Backstage, even if the software is not maintained by your company, SaaS offerings. So like you can just put anything in there and it'll start showing up. All software created through the software templates are automatically registered in the catalog. In addition to manually registering components, it's also possible to register components through static configuration. So you can statically point at stuff. And then teams owning the components are responsible for maintaining the metadata about it, including the flow, finding software in the catalog, starring components, integrating tooling through plugins. Okay, so let's go through and so we have this stuff that's already running. Catalog configuration, static location. I'm running out of steam here, guys. So I think the mistake that I made here is that I wanted to see something Kubernetes centric, but the reality is that Kubernetes is an augment to Backstage, not the other way around. And so the system of record for Backstage ends up being its database. And then within its database, you end up with a set of catalogs here. And so we have components, systems, APIs, locations, all that stuff. And so what we have here is we have a bunch of example components here via URL. And so let's go ahead and look at this file here. So we will open that up in the browser. So this is one of their examples. And so what this is that example components, and this references other things, components, and then we have artist lookup component. And so what we see is that it's just a thing, and it has a name and a description and a bunch of links. And so this ends up looking like a link, a title, an icon for it, and then it's a type of service, experimental team A. So why aren't those showing up anymore in our thing here? We did something because it showed up at some point. All, there we go, all. Okay, so we have artist lookup here. And so when we click on this, what it's doing is it's actually going to GitHub, downloading this file, and following that through. And it says, here's a new component here that shows this stuff coming up. And there's a whole bunch of information, essentially, like that it pulls together based on the metadata there. Oh, where'd it go? Here. So we have, and then we can go through and edit this. And it's like, okay, if you want to edit that, what you want to do is actually fork the repo and do some GitOpsy things to be able to do it. And then it's part of a system and owner type service. It has some tags on it, lifecycle. So you can actually decide, oh, and here's Kubernetes shows up here. Okay. So once you have a component defined someplace, then you can associate Kubernetes stuff with it. And so now we need to actually go through and actually add an annotation to this thing with the value. And so value here. So okay, so the Backstage Kubernetes ID annotation is missing. You need to add this annotation to your component if you want to enable this tool. Add the annotation. So do any of these things already have that annotation on them? Because I don't want to actually like create a new thing here. Pet store component. That's all docs. Okay, let's go through. So this is the pet store component, links description, playback lib. One of the interesting things here, just to be clear, is that the system of record is Git, and it looks like what's happening is Backstage is using Git or other things as a system of record to be able to initialize its database. And so there's a really interesting pattern in terms of using, external systems like this as a way to actually pull this stuff in. All right, we're running out of time here. But all right, let's go through and let's pretend. Okay, let's all right, we're gonna create a new Golang microservice. We're gonna choose this TGIK test, whatevs, Alpine, Go, Alpine, enable logs RS, Viper, Cobra CLI, add CI, none. Next step, who's going to own this? Store path. And then let's go through github.com, a beta, new repository. We're going to call this thing, what did I call it again? What did I call? Okay, well, Backstage test. I don't think it creates the repo for you. I don't know. Create the repository. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Next step, so it's going to create. Is it going to publish to the thing? Okay, so enable define publisher. Please make sure to register this host under an integration and app config. Oh, okay, here. I thought maybe, okay, so I think what it'll then do is it'll actually upload this to that if we're not careful. So, okay, so, but that is the software templates. That's this stuff over here. Creating, no, not documentation, tech docs, software templates. I feel like we skipped something here. There's a CLI for this. Integrations. So I think I have to give it a way that it can actually upload to. It can't use my, because, okay, so we only used GitHub we only use GitHub for me to auth to as an auth provider. It doesn't actually know. So configuration, static configuration. Let's go through. Maybe we can ask settings, authentication providers, available providers, feature flags. I would think. So one of the things I saw in the app config here is integrations, GitHub token. And so I think, but is this using my user token here? Let me switch away. Give me a second here. I don't want to expose this stuff to y'all. All right, so I'm adding a token. I'm going to do, let's see, this one is probably, this is on the back end, I'm sure, for GitHub token equals. Yeah, so okay, so I think I got this going on now. So now there's a GitHub token there. Maybe this will work again if I do this. Create Golang microservice, TGIK test, whatevs. Next step, Joe Beda. We have this thing here. Repository creation failed. Name already exists in this. Okay, so it'll create a new repository for you. Okay, let's give this a try again. TGIK test, whatevs. Next step, Joe Beda. And we're going to call it TGIK test. I'll have to clean some of this stuff up. Template. Oh, look at that. So it's actually creating the new GitHub repo for me. And then I can link to the repo. And here it is. Well, that's kind of swift. Kind of sweet. And then we can see it in the catalog here where, boom, there it is. Now, if I go to that repo here, not this one, but the other, I don't want to, okay. And here we have catalog.info, which is the thing that we're talking about here. And one of the things that we can do here is we can go through, edit this file, and we're going to do backstage.io Kubernetes foo. Yeah, sure. Why is it a protected branch? Ugh. Yeah, fine. Create a pull request. Review required. What the heck? Well, this is all best practices for stuff, and I'm trying to YOLO it, but I think it's cool that it's like, did the new repo include a .github? I think so, yeah. Yeah, GitHub workflows, build.yaml. So we essentially have, it's trying to pull and build the thing. And it kind of set up, it's kind of cool that it actually set up a bunch of cool stuff there, right? Like this is all best practices on this stuff, which is cool. Okay, and this thing, reviewer required, I should be able to. Okay, so now we're gonna go through and we're gonna fix this, manage access. Touch my security key. Where's the branches, master, default branch? It's no longer, okay. All right, so now at some point, if I look at this and go to Kubernetes, well, I did do this, annotations in the component, right? I don't know if it needs to actually read the... Oh, Kubernetes ID, damn it. All right, let's do this again. Commit directly to the master branch. Thank you. So now, okay, but how do I force it to do an update? How do I force it to sort of like unregister entity? I guess I'll restart the back end maybe. Not that one. Putting catalog. Completed location. This thing is it thinking or is it hung? I don't know. Get. It looks like something's busted. Oh, wait. All. Oh, you know what happened? You know what happened is that this stuff was only storing stuff in RAM. And so when I restarted it, it actually register existing component repository URL is this. So when I restarted it, it lost that data because we're essentially doing... So it wants me to log into GitHub. This got lost. Okay, so now this is in the catalog. Now we can look in the catalog at TGIK test, owner Joe Beda. Oh, and we got to, there was a problem retrieving Kubernetes objects. Unknown error, 403. So somehow this thing, get Kubernetes clusters. Okay, so it sees the kind cluster here. It doesn't actually see the pods there. There was a problem retrieving it. And so for some reason, it wasn't able to actually get there. But I think I understand what's going on here. I'm going to have to call it here, guys, because we've been going for about 2 hours. Let me go ahead and sum up what I'm thinking, because I think this stuff is pretty cool. The cluster role is not bounded. I thought I did bind the cluster role. I'm pretty sure I did. But like, I think we're I'm going to call it though. So what I think is really interesting about Backstage is that it's borrowing, like, number one. Okay, so first thing is that having to know React to configure this thing is a huge barrier. And so I think, number one, there's a lot of empathy that I think we should have for folks coming to the Kubernetes world. Because I think they feel the same way that I feel coming to the React world. Things that are trivial and like, well, of course, blah is happening, are not trivial when you don't understand the system and when you don't have a lot of experience there. So that's thing number one. Thing number two is that this is essentially a metadata store for components, things that developers may want to actually deal with. And the source of truth for these things, or at least from what I saw for these components, ends up being YAML files that are generally checked in to Git. And so they have a database, but that database is in some ways a cache or a list of the places that you want to look at to be able to do that. Now, I do think it's interesting, instead of using that database, they would be able to, maybe use CRD, so that every time you want to register a new component, there's a CRD, and the source of truth for Backstage ends up being the CRDs versus static versus being the database, that type of thing. I think that would be really interesting also. And so being able to sort of, there's I think room for this to be more Kubernetes native, which it's not right now. And so there's plenty of ways to use Backstage without Kubernetes, but also there's a lot of places where it can integrate with Kubernetes. It's not as Kubernetes native as I was maybe hoping it would be. And so that means that you have to maintain another database, and the auth stuff doesn't always work. And so I think it would be really interesting to think about what would Backstage look like, or how could Backstage be much more integrated with Kubernetes in terms of using it as the core data store and a bunch of other things. Yeah, so you could generate the CRD from this, but I would look to the CRD to be the source of truth of where to actually go and look for your sort of the YAML, where to go and look for the Git repost with the YAML files, that type of thing. All the auth stuff is incredibly confusing. And in systems like this, I'm like, well, I'm authing to Backstage, but then I have to also auth to GitHub. And like, how do we, how do these things work? Which tokens am I doing what? I honestly don't know. Like, there's some off screens coming up, and I just went through and clicked yes, because I didn't know any other way. I think in terms of plugins, like, it has a ton of plugin mechanisms. I think it's just like, maybe there's another plugin for being able to discover these things and using the Kubernetes stuff for that also. So I really like the idea of having this general idea of a component being able to aggregate these things into a single sort of card or homepage, and then having plugins that actually key off of that homepage to go off and get other data and integrate that and show things. I think that's really interesting. I think there's a lot to like there. And I think that idea definitely has legs. The doing this through the lens of like building a monolithic React app, I think that sets a pretty high bar in terms of people being able to do this, because at the end of the day, you have to be really comfortable building a React app to be able to configure this. And the number of people inside of large enterprises that are comfortable with React apps and also are in charge of creating essentially company-wide dashboards or service catalogs, like, that's a pretty small set of folks. And so I think, like, when I think about through the lens of like VMware, our core set of folks that we're working with are things like VI admins. These are folks that have like, they're operators through and through. Asking them to configure Kubernetes is enough, right? And that's something we're working on, is getting them comfortable with Kubernetes, getting them comfortable with Kubernetes and something like React to be able to deploy something like Backstage. Oh boy, that's a whole nother thing. And so, and then Carlos is saying is that select a plugin from the UI catalog and click. Yeah, like, are you saying they have that? Or like, yeah, I think having a plugin mechanism that is not as intertwined with the actual app would be interesting. I think, you look at the maturity of the WordPress world, right? You can install WordPress plugins and they fundamentally change WordPress without understanding PHP, right? So like, I feel like over time, something like this could get to the point where it actually starts feeling like WordPress in terms of being able to actually use it even as an admin without actually understanding the underlying technology. It's clearly not there right now, and maybe that's something that's on their roadmap and something that they're thinking about. So with that, thank you for sticking with me. We're pretty much at the 2-hour mark here. I feel like I learned a lot. I understand sort of where this fits in. A lot of great ideas. Understand sort of the level of skill and commitment then to start using this stuff also, which is really, really interesting. So thank you, everybody. And I'm signing off, and we'll see you next week for TGIK. Not sure who's going to be doing it, but there we are. Thank you, everybody. Have a good one.